Coming up in today's mental health moment, if we can instead sponsor and support each other in life, we can then teach others how to overcome their pain and struggles. Here's a story of someone who applied these principles and did just that, and has enjoyed his life in recovery for over 30 years. Have you heard the expression that a cord of 3 strands cannot easily be broken? It's true. Think about it. Having one strand of rope will give you some amount of strength, but when you join it with another strand, you get double the power. And braiding 3 strands creates a unified bond that is much more difficult to break. And likewise, there is power when we join together in relationship and unity with others. Some 85 years ago, 2 people got together to talk, and they realized that they both were struggling in their lives, and both had chosen to try to escape their problems. And in talking, they accepted that they needed help. So they began to think, maybe if we were able to team up, support each other, and offer some accountability, we could conquer this problem. They applied that life principle that a cord of 3 strands cannot easily be broken, and so started their journey on the road to recovery from alcohol addiction. And the 12-step process was born. All 12 steps are based on solutions to our problems. Because as people, we often struggle to admit defeat and surrender. Like somehow admitting our struggles and waving that white flag of surrender makes us weak. But the truth is, in admitting our weaknesses, we're choosing to stop the cycle of hurting ourselves, and we begin to actually allow our real strength to rise up. Because if we're not careful, we can let our pain build up into anger, and this energy source can be used as a tool to keep us going, but it's a false sense of success. If we can instead sponsor and support each other in life, we can then teach others how to overcome their pain and struggles. Here's a story of someone who applied these principles and did just that, and has enjoyed his life in recovery for over 30 years.
I've been blessed in the last 33 years to have been able to enjoy life without mind-altering chemicals, and also to work in the field of addiction and help others to introduce them to recovery. So with that, I've decided that I would try and explain. As a counselor, I take an educational approach to the disease of chemical dependency. And I'm going to refer to it as that. A lot of people talk about drug addiction or alcoholism or label themselves as an addict. I'm going to talk about, and I like to use the word chemical dependency. And I'd like people to think of the idea that our brain, for instance, creates a little more than 100 different types of chemicals. I was the oldest of my family, and I was very rebellious, which is, I took the, if you ever heard the term dysfunctional family, there are certain roles that are played. They you got the rebel, the scapegoat, the enabler, you got all these different titles. Everybody, it's almost like somebody walks into your house, hands everybody a script and says, okay, and I'll just give you an example of mine. My father was the alcoholic, so he was the dysfunctional person, right? And as a result of his dysfunction, it creates all these other folks, like, my mom became an enabler. She made excuses for why he acted the way he did. I was the oldest child, and hence I found I broke the rules first. So because I was the first to break the rules, I became a rebel. It seemed like I was in trouble. My younger siblings, one became a class clown, a lost child. My sister was a lost child. So she was very restricted. She didn't say much. She kind of was in the background, even though she was there for everything. She was quiet, and she paid close attention to what the rebel was doing. and how much trouble I was getting into, and so on and so forth and whatever. So I lived in an atypical dysfunctional family, and was subjected to, and this I may seem like I'm brushing over this or explaining this in like as if it didn't affect me. It did affect me greatly for many, many years. Remember, I have been fortunate to be sober for 33 years, and I would say probably the first 10 years of my recovery, I spent a lot of time being angry and resentful and opinionated, and didn't want to talk about certain topics, especially my childhood. And but as time went on, and I learned more things about myself, my own personality, and what I'd become, and also how it happened and why. Say, for instance, my father was, like I said, a very strict, I would say, angry person. And it came across that way to me. It seemed like anytime I was always concerned about what kind of mood he was in. A lot of whispering going on in my house, like, "Hey, is Dad in a good mood today? Is everything going to be okay?" And because you just didn't know. He'd walk in one day from work, and he'd be handing out, change and candy bars and telling everybody they were wonderful. And the very next day, he'd walk in and kick the dog across the room and slap you for not folding the towel right. Just crazy stuff. And it was like all the time. And it was just, people talk about a roller coaster ride. I think that in a child's life, it should kind of go like this. Every once in a while, a little bit up and down, but kind of pretty, steady, cruising along. But if you're brought up in a childhood where life is going like this, wee, whoa, wee, it creates a lot of uncertainty. So the child becomes insecure and afraid. And what I found out is that basically capital punishment, which, hitting a child, what it teaches them is to be very afraid and avoiding. They will not ask questions that are important in life. When it comes time for puberty and things like that, and the boy needs to ask Dad how to shave. He's not going to ask Dad how to shave because he's afraid of Dad. It's like we're packed full of garbage. Like you take a garbage bag and you fill it full of garbage, fill it, and it'll stretch, and you could pack more in there and so on. But sooner or later, that thing's going to get full, and it's got to get taken out to the trash. But if you're brought up in a dysfunctional family, and there's nowhere to take it to, there's nowhere to get rid of it, there's nowhere to whatever, and eventually it has to get taken out. You got to collect up all the trash, all the bad feelings, all the negative thoughts, the anger, the resentments, because that's what's created in chaos. If you're brought up in chaos or trauma, some people use the word trauma, which is a great term, because there's different types of trauma, all different times in your life, greater and lesser degrees. But if you're brought up in a dysfunctional family where there's maybe a lot of violence, a lot of yelling, name calling, screaming, all that kind of stuff. If you're familiar with the cops, that's all garbage getting shoved into this tight bag. And as a kid, you got nowhere to put it. There's nowhere for you to go. In fact, you're told you're not allowed to tell anybody. That what happens in this house stays in this house. Wonderful little secrets like that. And so you carry this stuff with you. And if you're like me and somebody introduces you to a beer at 9 or 10 years old, and you drink it and you have this wonderful positive feeling, it may lead to something. Not everybody, but a lot of us start to depend on, we find that it's a quick escape, a temporary relief. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was introduced to beer. And so, and I also, my parents smoked cigarettes. So, I thought that was interesting. So I tried them too. Of course, I had to sneak. But I liked the effect of alcohol when I drank it. The first time I drank, I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And we were, I'll give you an example, we were rabbit hunting. And my father said, "Well, if you're going to do grown-up things, I guess it's time you two," and I had a brother about a year and a half younger than me, "you two, could split a beer." So we split a beer. And you get that, of course, everybody talks about that warm, fuzzy feeling that you get. And I happen to like that. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was with my father, whom to be, he was a rough customer. He was very strict, and definitely use capital punishment, a little too much at times. So I was afraid of him big time. But I noticed at that time when I had that half a beer, I somehow seemed to be not afraid of him and more relaxed, and it was like a positive thought in my mind that this thing that I was drinking, although it tasted terrible, it had a really cool effect. So my first impression of alcohol was it was a good thing. And so now, of course, when you're only 9 or 10 years old, it ain't like you can walk and do a carry out and buy a 6-pack. So it was rare that I could ever do it again. But from time to time, I get a chance to drink some beer. My dad also made homemade wine, so I got to taste test that stuff, and of course, it had the same effect. By the time I was probably 11 or 12 years old, I would drink on the weekends because it was easier to get away with it. Maybe stay the night at a friend's house and we would eat some beers and stuff like that, and get some cigarettes and that kind of thing. And it was fun and it was exciting. You were doing something you weren't supposed to do, and it wasn't you didn't get in any trouble, and everything's great and wonderful. And so then somebody else introduced like marijuana. So I tried some marijuana around 12 years old or so, and I really liked that chemical. That chemical was a plus in my brain. It must have met with some other chemicals up there in my head, and they just had a wonderful time, and so that became the favorite. And I'd say by the time I was a freshman in high school, I was pretty much smoking that stuff every day, and cigarettes every day, and alcohol became kind of a weekend thing. And I really didn't like I liked the early effects of alcohol, but I didn't like the after effects, the getting sick and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't into that. And I didn't like losing control. And so I kind of stuck to like drugs like marijuana. And then later on, and it was probably about my junior year of high school, got into some cocaine. Speed was popular back then. And even at times you'd get some codeine or something like that, and I was allergic to that, so I always got really super sick. But once upon a time, I was introduced to heroin, and I like that. And so I'm one of these. I talk about chemical dependency, and I happen to be one of these guys that pretty much liked everything that came my way. I did not discriminate against any mind-altering drugs, and some of them. The interesting thing is, I was always trying to control certain ones because I didn't like the after effect. But it seemed like as if every time I started out, I got to, it was all about having fun, that plus in my mind. But I always ended up at the end of the night, on the floor or hugging a toilet or outside, getting sick. And I hated it, and you swear you're never going to do it again, only to do it again and again and again. And so, but the positives, the pluses, all the fun you have, when you're using mind-altering chemicals seem to outweigh any of the negatives, I've noticed, until maybe you start getting into some heavier consequences. Maybe you run and get a DUI or you get in trouble with the courts. Now, who becomes addicted? Why is Jim an alcoholic? Why am I chemically dependent? Why do I like all the drugs? Well, there is no real answer to that. It's almost like a moot point. So 2 out of 10 people, roughly 20% of any industrialized nation, people become chemically dependent for various reasons. Is it society? Is it nature? Did I learn to be chemically dependent was it because of my dysfunctional upbringing? Was it because of my peers who partied too, and their parents liked to drink and smoke cigarettes and smoke and do drugs? Was it because I was influenced by those, or was it because it doesn't matter? Anybody that drinks alcohol, I don't care if you're an alcoholic or you're not an alcoholic, your body, when you drink it, the good news is it breaks usually like a 12-ounce can of beer or a 1-ounce shot of 80 proof whiskey or 7 ounces of a domestic wine. Your body can break it down and get rid of it in about an hour, provided that your liver works well. So the interesting thing is when you drink any kind of alcohol, it breaks it down into acetic acid, which is vinegar, and then some of that's broke down into acetaldehyde, which is like formaldehyde, which is very toxic. and then that gets broken down into the bloodstream and eventually gets to the brain, and it creates a light drug called THIQ, tetrahydroisoquinoline, and it's like morphine, or what your body creates naturally. So you have opiate receptors in your brain, and alcohol fits in there really, really nicely. Now, usually if you're a light drinker, you only drink once in a while, your body breaks most of that down and gets rid of it through sweat and urination. But if you drink, say you're not an alcoholic, but you're at a wedding and you've drank 5 beers that night and you're really intoxicated. Basically, you what they call you got alcohol poisoning, which means you got some of the acetaldehyde into your blood, too much of it. It went to the brain. It shut down a lot of the. It's an anesthesia. Alcohol was the only anesthetic we had for centuries. If you remember the old cowboys and western movies, they'd make them drink half a fifth of whiskey, and then they go dig the bullet out. Well, the bad news is alcohol was hard to control. So if you drink, the guy that drank half a bottle of whiskey and then went to get the bullet out, a lot of times he would die from that because he got too much blood alcohol poisoning, and he died. His body would just shut down, and it would be, so in fact, they created ether, which is alcohol without water. It's an anesthesia, and they could put you out, and they put the brain to sleep at certain levels, and then they could do operations on you, right? They could move the muscles around, that kind of stuff. They could control it easier. They quit using ether, 50 years or plus ago because of the hangover effect, just like alcohol. It was when people came out of the ether, they became violently sick, so they've created other gases that they use for surgeries now. And there's a quick little tutorial on alcohol. Out of all the chemicals, to be honest with you, it's probably the hardest on the body. It has devastating effects on the stomach, the esophagus, the liver, the kidneys, and the brain specifically. And it alters the brain chemistry. Your brain is already equipped with what it needs. What happens over long-term use, what I've noticed, this is just an observation of friends, family, and people I've treated over the years. One thing about staying straight a long time is you see a lot, and you work in addiction, you see a lot of things, and you get a timeline to change. But it appears that the longer you use mind-altering drugs, it can and does cause other mental health problems like depression, anxiety, all kinds of other, diagnosable, true, aside from, so the person stops using drugs, right? And they're straight for 6 years. But all that time they've been depressed and angry and frustrated. They go to meetings, they talk to people. What has happened in most cases is that they have done so much damage to the brain. And this has been studied. And they have ways of testing the brain, and they've got computerized imagery now of, like, you can give certain tests and determine what parts of the brain have been damaged by a stroke or, and even drug addiction, alcohol. So they know for a fact that large portions of the brain after long periods of time die, like tiny little strokes in the brain. And you go to stop using, and basically your brain is incapable of creating the chemicals that are needed for you to be happy. At age 18, I was in a car accident, and I got my legs crushed between a couple cars. It wasn't my fault. And I received about 12 grand in insurance money because of the accident. Now, for an unemployed 19-year-old kid living in the old South End of Toledo, literally living in garages and cars and friends' houses, and once in a while you get a shower and get something to eat, but mainly you're just chasing drugs all the time. For a guy like that, you give him $12,000 in cash. In my mind, I was rich. All of a sudden, I hit the lottery, and I bought some equipment to do some construction work, and I was going to go into business for myself. And I also bought a pound of marijuana, and I was going to become South Toledo's best pot dealer ever. I was going to have the greatest marijuana and just sell marijuana and just, going to make a fortune and so on and so forth. About 3 days after I got the $12,000, somebody came across some really good cocaine. And about 5 or 6 days after that, I couldn't find my truck. I got in about 4 or 5 fist fights with good friends of mine, paranoia. All my money was gone. And I was basically, what happened, you know? So basically I wanted a big cocaine binge, and the bottom fell out. That was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. I all of a sudden had lots of people mad at me. I had nowhere to go. And so with my tail between my legs, I went to my parents' house, knocked on the door. They wouldn't let me in. I became such a dysfunctional clown, you know, by that time, that I wasn't even trusted around them. You know, I was a thief and a liar, and I did all the atypical things that, you know, people with the disease of addiction do. And so they wouldn't even let me in. But they're like, what do you want? And I'm like, well, I just need a shower and something to eat. I haven't had nothing to eat. And you know, are you doing drugs? Well, no, not today. I don't have any money. I ran out. And I look like hell. And so my father said, well, hang on a minute. And he was mad, and he made a phone call. And he happened to know somebody that knew somebody that ran the Tennyson Center program, which at that time was the super drug treatment center here in Toledo. And so I was offered to go through the Tennyson Center on a free bed. And back then, those were like $14,000 a month treatment centers, and you didn't have top grade insurance, you know, you couldn't get in. And so I simply went to my parents' house, and next thing you know, they're driving me to St. Vincent's Hospital, and next thing you know, I'm in a detox unit, and then I'm in the Tennyson Center program. And I'm with all these people. And I mean, it all happened in like a couple, 3 days. And I don't remember, you know, at that time, I just was like, what? This is weird. I got some sleep. I got some meals in me, took a shower. Somebody brought me some clothes. I didn't have no clothes. And here I am in this treatment program, and they're talking about all these things. And I'm like, this is like a scene out of, you know, the Twilight Zone or something. After about 2 weeks of not talking and becoming very paranoid, I had I guess they called it a nervous breakdown, and I went to the psych unit for 10 days. In 1935, two alcoholics got together, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. Bill Wilson was a stockbroker from New York. Dr. Bob was a proctologist of all. I mean, there's a great, you know, line of profession to be, and be an alcoholic too. I mean, alcoholic proctologist, I mean, you just can't. That's just the best. So in Akron, Ohio. And so these two guys happened to meet because Bill was in Akron. He worked on the stock exchange, and he was doing some inspecting of a company in Akron, Ohio, the Cooper Tire Company to be exact. And while he was there, he was by himself, and he'd been sober about 6 months, and he was in a hotel, and he was thinking about drinking. And so he's by just pure luck, he saw a listing of different churches in the lobby, and he called around asking these ministers and people at these churches if they knew any alcoholics that he could talk to. They thought that he was drinking himself and was drunk, and was wondering, you know, like he was trying to get a hold of somebody else to drink with or something. But he's like, no, I'm trying to stay sober. So he meets Dr. Bob, and they get together and they start sharing their experiences. And to make a long story short, you know, within a short period of time, they take this little meeting, this idea of them simply sitting down and telling each other what their experiences have been with alcohol, and the fact that they don't, and kind of attesting to each other that they don't want to drink anymore, and they'd love to have a better life. And maybe together they could do this if they teamed up, instead of trying to do it by themselves, which they've had no luck. If they simply got together and maybe, you know, teamed up on this, they could maybe do it. There has been no other movement of any kind, whether it was the development of short of Christianity. Now, this is just historically speaking. I'm not trying to turn you into a Christian. That's not what this is about. I'm just talking about the pure idea of Christianity, right? Churches, the Methodists, the Protestants, the Catholics, all those different. they grew exponentially in a really short period of time, right? Once upon a time, there was hardly any churches, and then bam, there was churches everywhere. Something magical happened, they claim, and so on, and I happen to believe that. But the growth of Christianity was very fast. The 12-step recovery programs is right up there with those kinds of, I guess, miracles in life. They're everywhere. And lots of people have gone to recovery type meetings and have gotten help. And basically, we're doing the same thing that Bill and Bob did. We get together, we talk about what's going on, and mainly we talk about solutions. So a person comes to a recovery meeting, and all the 12 steps are based on solutions. The first one, the very first step, it talks about we admitted we were powerless over, fill in the blank, and our lives become unmanageable, right? Now, as a human being, the human brain is not built to surrender. We're not used to going, I give up, I lose, and therefore, that must mean I lost somehow. By admitting defeat over something, we somehow feel like we've lost. But in the 12-step programs, by admitting that you got a problem, it's kind of a reverse thing. You're actually by surrendering, letting it go, stopping the use, you're actually winning. You instantly start winning at life. You're on the upswing. And so, but there are some things you're going to have to do in order to fix all that. You're going to have to take a look at your past history and what you've done. You're going to have to make maybe some amends to people that you've hurt. The biggest amend you're going to have to make is to yourself. Sooner or later, you're going to have to get around to looking in the mirror and telling yourself, you know what? You did a lot of dumb things, and a lot of bad things have happened to you. However, until you can forgive yourself, until you forgive others, you're not going to be able to go on. You're going to be stuck in anger, resentments, frustration, self-pity, all the negative things that bring people down. Those are luxuries. In the recovery meetings, we talk about anger as a luxury that we can ill afford. It's an energy source. If I'm angry or upset about something, I use it as a tool to keep me busy and basically keep me from growing. And some people get a false sense of productivity. They think they're getting somewhere by being angry and resentful. But in our program, we are trying to and have to let go of all the anger and the resentments and all those kinds of things in order for us to move on and let positive things into our lives. So like I was talking before about taking as a child, when you're living in a dysfunctional family, or you come from the traumatic situation, say you've had a lot of trauma in your life. Maybe you're a war veteran. Maybe you were in a domestic violence situation where a significant other was harmful to you. So somewhere along the way, you have to take all that pain and energy as you've been packing it in. You got to get that out. You got to get that dumped there. You got to get that bag cleared out, and so that you can make room for positive things to come in. Otherwise, you're just clouded with all this negative energy that'll get you absolutely nowhere in life. At age 19, I'm in treatment with a bunch of adults, mainly, guys in their 30s and 40s. That was about the average age, I would say, at that time when I was in this particular treatment center. And all the things that they talked about, I sat there at age 19 and I simply couldn't relate. I hadn't lost my job. I never really had a job. I had lost my wife or my kids. I had never gotten arrested or had a DUI. All these things that they claim were happening to them, I sat there saying to myself, none of this is happening to me. I don't know, why am I here? I got thrown out of the halfway house 2 weeks after I landed there, from the treatment center. Because why did I get kicked off? Because I can't follow rules. I don't play well with others. I'm 6 foot tall. At this time in my life, I'm about 300 pounds. At that time, I was about 250 pounds. And I will just say I thought that I guess I was invincible. And I acted differently back then than I do now. And so these people didn't like my my approach to things, so they threw me out. I tried to get my act together. They eventually let me back into the Zepf Center unit. I have somehow managed to complete the program, and then I was back on the street. I had nowhere to go, so fortunately they had these things called halfway houses at the time, and I happened to go to the Idle Time Club, which is an AA recovery place here in Toledo, and I stayed there, and I met a guy in recovery, older gentleman. He's about 20 years older than me, and he'd been sober about 3 or 4 years, and he was the first person that I heard talk in a meeting out of all these people that had these treatment center meetings, groups. I honestly thought that everybody in recovery was full of it. They just were lying, and that nobody simply just quits and their life gets all better, that these guys are all using some kind of chemical, and this is just some game. This is some kind of churchy, religious, group of nutcases that are trying to, brainwash me into thinking that I'm, something. And I'm like, I've had, in my mind, I just had a bad run of luck. Things were just, were not going my way, and it was going to turn around. And once I got enough money, or I got this going on, everything would be fine. But this gentleman talked at a meeting, and he said some things, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but he seemed to be hitting every button in me. Everything that he said, I sat there going, yeah, yep, right, right, wow. All of a sudden, it made a lot of things that I had been hearing, but I hadn't listened to. I wasn't really paying attention, I guess. All of a sudden, a lot of things started to make sense to me. And so I couldn't wait to talk to this guy. So after the meeting, I asked him to talk, if we could talk, and we talked. And for some reason, I started telling this guy all these things in my life, kind of like I'm doing now. And I said, I don't want to go back to chaos. I'd love to have a normal life, but I don't really know what that is, and so I don't know if I asked him that day, but shortly thereafter, I asked him to be my sponsor. And, a lot of you guys hear about sponsorship. But basically, his job was to teach me the 12 steps. I went to AA meetings, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I do consider myself an alcoholic, but that wasn't my primary journey. It doesn't matter. I don't need to learn how to use chemicals. I need to learn how to stay straight. So the 12-step meetings, and I don't care if it's AA or NA or CA, they're all the 12 steps in every single program, including Overeaters Anonymous. They all use they're worded exactly the same pretty much, except for the very first step. So if you go to an AA meeting, I'll say, we admit we are powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. If you go to an NA meeting, they're going to say we are powerless over drugs and our lives become. They change the word alcohol and drugs. They replace it with so on and so forth. And that's about it. All the other wording is exactly the same. And so what I have found out through the years of going to meetings, so I picked this guy to be my sponsor, and his job was to teach me the steps. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what he did. He sat down. We got together from time to time. I started going to the same kind of meetings he went to, and I went to AA meetings, and he said, we're going to work the steps. So we started working the 12 steps. So addiction is, we thought that, remember that I told you when we first started using chemicals, it was a plus. It was a positive in my mind. It was helping me. Now, in order to make a plus, a negative is like next to impossible. It's like trying to take a cucumber that you turn into a pickle and make it back into a cucumber again. You can't do it, right? That's almost like, that's why addiction is so tough for people, because it's a positive in their head. And they all of a sudden, but through the 12 steps, if I work the rest of the steps with help, I need guidance on this, for one thing. I need somebody that's already been through this, who has a sponsor themselves. So a lot of people at the time and tried to give Bill some advice on how to write the book, and he wasn't getting a whole lot. Nobody had very much success with alcoholics. So the bottom line, and we still don't. A lot of people, like, we have these treatment centers, we have these recovery, but unfortunately, and I'm not a statistics person. I hate using statistics, and I'm not gonna. But if everybody that was supposed to stop doing drugs, mind-altering chemicals, and if we all got straight, there wouldn't be enough places to have meetings. Unfortunately, a lot of us still are dying from this disease, and that's just the way it's just. But that doesn't. I'll tell you, when working in this field, working in the field of addiction, watching people get better, and hearing the positive stories, it's worth every second, minute, day that I've ever put into anything in my life. Just to know that somebody else has, and the people around them have gone on to have wonderful lives by simply, number one, not using the chemicals, and number two, start to be givers instead of takers. If I were to sum up all the 12 steps and try to explain it in a few simple terms, I would explain the 12 steps, if done properly. That means you become teachable, you get a sponsor, you go to the meetings, and you adapt, and you actually apply the things that we talk about in those steps to your life. What you'll get yourself back to is the golden rule. There was a simple, and it's a Christian thing, but it simply says, "Do unto others as you would have done unto you." Think about that, how simplistic that. Do unto others. If everybody was willing to treat others how they would like to be treated, and now hopefully that, what I mean by that is kind, respect, care, patience, tolerance, understanding. Life is not about you understanding me. My job is to understand you, and try to help as best I can. My parents used to say, and I don't know if my parents said, but I used to hear this thing, being a parent is tough. There's no book, there's no book on being a parent. Well, that's changed. There's lots of books on being a parent now, and they're actually really good, a lot of them. And the bottom line is, the biggest thing, what addiction and recovery gave to me, there's a lot of diseases, and the chemical dependency is considered a disease because of the signs and symptoms. There are several things that happen to us that only happen to people who are chemically dependent, and that's basically how they determine whether or not somebody has a disease. So if you're a diabetic, you have certain symptoms, thirsty, frequent urination, tired, da 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 da. You tell those symptoms to your doctor, they run a few blood tests, boom, they say you're diabetic. Here's the medication. Here's what helped you. If you're chemically dependent, you lie, steal, cheat, you're craving use all the time, you use despite consequences, you're getting in trouble, you spend all your money on, those are all symptoms of something, right? Only people who aren't chemically dependent don't wonder if they're chemically dependent because they don't have the same issues we do. So if you're wondering, boy, I wonder if I am chemically dependent. If that's even a question in your mind, just start going to meetings, because I guarantee you'll fit right in. What happens is, now, I over E, intellect predominates over emotions, in an algebraic term, plus C equals chemicals. The C stands for chemicals, any drug you can think of. And I guess in algebra, what happens is when you do this, you reverse the E over the I. Now you become emotions over intellect. So humans are supposed to function intellect over emotions. If they add C, chemicals, to their life, then they become emotions over intellect. So everything that goes on in a chemically dependent person's life is based on their feelings. So I use chemicals because it's raining outside. I use chemicals because it's not raining outside. I use chemicals because my dad was mean to me. I use chemicals because my dad didn't pay any attention to me. I use chemicals because my wife is mean, my job is hard, the dog peed on my shoes, on and on and on. Everything I do is based on how I'm feeling at the time and how it affected me somehow. What I'm doing is I'm basing all of my decisions based on my feelings. and I'm taking my intellect. What chemicals are really good at is when you get sedated or a buzz or high or drunk, you're eliminating your intellect. That's the whole purpose of using, is so you don't have to think about what's going on. People become intoxicated for lots of reasons, and not everybody's chemically dependent. But you, over a period of time of continuous use, you can become chemically dependent. The problem is once you become chemically dependent, is you're living your life all based on your emotions, and you're not really thinking things through. I say all that to say, once you stop using drugs, the whole purpose, the whole thing in life is let's start to think of things logically. So I could go to you, even if you're slightly buzzed, and I say, if you keep doing drugs all the time, eventually it's going to cause problems in your life, and it'd probably be a good idea if you stop. Even most people who are drunk or high would say, well, that kind of makes sense. They would kind of agree with you. But talking to them under the influence is not a good idea, because they're probably just going to continue to drink, and they'll forget everything I just said, and they'll go about their way. When people sober up and you give them a chance and give them some time, and you start to give them positive information that they can actually use, and that's what we do in recovery, they have an opportunity to start using their intellect. So I say that there really is no reason to relapse. So anybody that's staying straight right now, there is no true intellectual reason to go back to the chemicals. If you sit down, if you're having trouble in your life, which we all do, including myself, there are times where my life gets frustrating. The best thing for me to do is sit down and talk to somebody about what's going on, and try to find some reasons and some answers to my problems. But if I get upset, angry, resentful, depressed, sad, and try to figure it out from an emotional standpoint, I'm probably going to have a harder time. So I need to practice, and recovery is about practicing things. I need to practice using my intellect. I was not taught to, though. If you're brought up, and most of us, a lot of people are brought up with some level of dysfunction or another, and have lots of trauma in their life. And we have had a tendency to lean towards our emotions to solve our problems. But bottom line is, they don't truly get resolved unless we're able to find reasonable answers to our brain. Chemicals are just simply not a reasonable answer. We are killing ourselves. And I choose today not to do that. And it's a daily choice. Every day I have to make the decision, and it doesn't take long, maybe half of a second. Am I going to have a good day today? Am I going to be positive today? And usually I start that out with some people. In my case, I start out with prayer. I ask God to help me have a good day today. And you can believe whatever about God you want to. That's up to you. I simply use the term God. I think there's some kind of positive universe power going on in the universe. I personally am a Christian, but I'm not. This is not about any particular religion or faith or anything like that. You can believe. That's one thing that's cool about the 12 steps, is they're open to atheists, agnostics, Christians, Buddhists, Muslim. It doesn't matter what religion you're from. You're welcome in any kind of a 12-step recovery meeting. They're a great place to get started. I'm not saying that they're the only place. There are other self-help programs around, and if wherever you find if you can find a way to get your emotions out of the way and use your intellect and stick to the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have done unto you, you'll have a great life. You cannot possibly do the right thing and the wrong thing at the same time. A lot of times the guys that I initially try to help, they might not change that day, but maybe I sprinkled some kind of seed in their brain that 3 years from now, they'll remember something that was said. They may not remember it was me that said it. They'll remember it was something else, but my job is to plant seeds. And if people can grow from that, then great. And so, and that I can't give up on. I can't change that. I can't change that. I refuse to give up on that theory or that philosophy.
Gambling is taking part in a game in which you risk money or something of monetary value for a chance to win money or a prize. The chance of winning doesn't change each time you play, but your thinking can as the excitement to win builds. Today's tip brought to you by the Zepf Center Gambling Treatment Program.